Almost 1 out of every 3 people on this planet shares your blood type. In some countries, it is closer to 1 out of every 2. If you carry a positive blood, you belong to one of the biggest groups of human beings that has ever existed on Earth. And yet, for most of your life, this fact probably never felt important. It was just a word on a medical form, a line on an ID card, something a doctor mentioned once during a checkup that you forgot about within minutes. But that simple label is not random at all. It is written deep inside your DNA, inside a gene so old that it existed long before our species even had a name, passed down through thousands of generations of ancestors, stretching back further than the earliest villages, further than the first crops ever planted, further than the very first humans who left Africa and spread across the world. For a very long time, doctors saw blood type as nothing more than a practical detail, something useful before surgery and nothing beyond that. But then genetic science advanced far beyond anyone's expectations. And when researchers finally decoded what was really happening behind the letter A, they uncovered a story nobody was prepared for. A story about ancient people crossing frozen land in search of new homes. A story about deadly diseases that quietly decided which families lived and which did not. And a story about a strange cultural belief, still followed by hundreds of millions of people across Asia today, the belief that your blood does not just flow through your body, but actually shapes your personality and your fate. This is the real science-backed story of what your DNA says about a positive blood, and some of what you're about to hear may genuinely change how you see yourself. To understand what makes your blood different from anyone else's, you first need to understand what is actually happening on the surface of your red blood cells. Every single one of them is covered in small chemical markers, almost like tiny flags planted on the outer shell of the cell. Your immune system is constantly scanning these markers, using them to figure out what belongs inside your body and what does not. This entire sorting system, the one responsible for placing every human being into group A, B, or O, comes down to just one gene, and which version of that gene you happen to inherit from your parents. That gene lives on chromosome 9, and it holds the instructions for building a particular enzyme. In people with type A blood, this enzyme attaches a specific sugar molecule onto the outside of blood cells. That sugar is known as the A antigen. People with type B blood have an enzyme that builds a slightly different sugar structure. People with type O blood have a version of the gene that is essentially switched off, so nothing gets added at all, and the base structure stays plain. That is the whole difference between blood types, a handful of sugar molecules, decided by a tiny change in genetic code. And still, this small difference is powerful enough to determine whether a blood transfusion saves someone's life or kills them within minutes. Now think about the plus sign after the letter A. That symbol has nothing to do with the A-B-O system at all. It comes from an entirely separate set of genes known as the Rh factor, named after the rhesus monkeys used in the experiments that first uncovered it. Being Rh positive means your blood cells carry an additional protein, called the D antigen, sitting right next to the A markers. Roughly 85% of people on Earth carry this positive version. So whenever you say the words A positive, you are actually describing 2 completely separate genetic stories layered on top of each other. 2 different genes, 2 different histories, both passed down to you long before you were even born. This is where the story stops being simple, because when researchers traced these blood markers back through time, the trail did not stop at the beginning of the human species. It kept going much further back than that. The A blood type is not something unique to humans. Gorillas have it. Chimpanzees have it too. When scientists compared this gene across the great apes, they found that the A and B versions are millions of years old, older than the moment humans and our closest primate relatives split apart on the evolutionary tree. Scientists call this a trans-species polymorphism, and it is an unusual thing to find in nature. It means that this exact genetic variation has survived, side by side, across many different species, for a length of time that is hard to even picture. Your A antigen is not just older than farming or cities. It is very likely older than the human species itself. And that raises an important question. When a genetic trait survives for millions of years without disappearing, natural selection is almost certainly protecting it for a good reason. Blood type is not just a random leftover trait. Something has kept these variations alive, generation after generation, for a very long time. And for years, scientists simply could not explain what that something was. When the answer finally arrived, it had almost nothing to do with blood itself and everything to do with the invisible enemies that have been chasing humans since the very beginning of our existence. The reason your blood type is still around today is that for the majority of human history, it played a role in survival. Not survival for you personally, but survival for the long chain of ancestors who came before you, fighting against the deadliest threat our species has ever faced. It was not wild animals. It was not starvation. It was disease. Bacteria, viruses, and parasites have taken more human lives throughout history than every war ever fought combined. And it turns out these microscopic invaders have a very close, very strange relationship with the sugar markers sitting on our blood cells. Here's the pattern that scientists slowly piece together over time. Many disease-causing organisms actually use these surface markers as a kind of grip to attach themselves to our cells. A pathogen built to latch onto the A antigen can infect people with type A blood fairly easily, but has a much harder time with type O blood. A different pathogen, built for the plain surface of type O blood, can spread rapidly through that group while barely affecting people with type A. Cholera, for instance, tends to hit people with type O blood much harder than others. Certain forms of malaria interact with these blood markers in ways that change how serious the infection becomes. Even the bacteria responsible for most stomach ulcers uses specific blood group sugars to attach itself inside the gut. So no single blood type ever came out as the clear winner in this ongoing battle. Each type traded protection from one disease for vulnerability to another. In a community hit hard by one epidemic, people with type A blood might survive while others did not. In the very next outbreak, an entirely different blood type might have the advantage instead. This process is called balancing selection, and it explains exactly why none of these blood type variations ever disappeared from the human population. Nature was never trying to pick one perfect blood type. It was keeping every option available like a deck of cards held in reserve because nobody could ever know which disease would strike next or which blood type would offer the best defense against it. Some researchers have even suggested that the massive pandemics of human history, including the plagues that wiped out huge portions of medieval populations, may have quietly shifted the balance of blood types among the people who survived them. Scientists are still working out exactly how much influence these events actually had, but there is real evidence pointing in that direction. None of this knowledge existed until fairly recently in human history. For most of the time, humans have walked the earth. Blood was simply blood. And the earliest doctors who tried performing transfusions watched their patients die without any understanding of why it kept happening. Then in the year 1901, an Austrian scientist named Karl Landsteiner began mixing blood samples taken from his colleagues, and he noticed something strange. Some combinations blended together smoothly, while others clumped into a thick, dangerous sludge. He had just discovered the existence of blood groups, and that single discovery turned blood transfusion from a deadly gamble into a genuine medical science. His work eventually earned him a Nobel Prize, and it has saved a number of lives that is honestly impossible to calculate. But Landsteiner had only solved part of the puzzle. He understood what blood types were, but not why they existed or where they came from. It would take another 100 years of genetic research to finally answer those deeper questions. For type A blood specifically, modern research has identified a handful of real health patterns worth mentioning honestly. On average, people with blood types other than O, which includes type A, tend to show a slightly higher risk of blood clotting and certain heart-related issues. Some large-scale studies have connected type A blood with a modest increase in stomach cancer risk, likely linked to that same ulcer causing bacteria mentioned earlier. During the recent global pandemic, some early studies suggested that people with type A blood may have faced a somewhat higher risk of severe illness, while type O appeared to offer a small amount of extra protection, although the effect size was small, and researchers continued debating the findings for years afterward. The important word in all of this is small. These are gentle statistical trends spread across enormous populations, not a fixed outcome for any individual person. You cannot change your blood type, and it is nowhere near the most important factor influencing your overall health. So none of this information should cause any worry. It is simply the leftover evidence of an ancient survival deal your ancestors made with the microscopic world around them, a deal whose terms you happen to inherit. Now the story shifts direction because type A blood is not spread evenly across the globe. It forms clusters, and nowhere are these clusters more culturally significant than across parts of Asia. In Japan, type A is the single most common blood type, found in nearly 4 out of every 10 people. Across Korea and in large regions of China, it remains one of the most dominant blood groups as well. These numbers are not random coincidences. They are the leftover traces of ancient human migrations, of groups of people who traveled, settled down, and passed their genes forward across thousands of years, often within fairly isolated populations, allowing certain blood types to slowly rise to the top over time. Picture how this actually plays out. A small group of people crosses a mountain range or sails across open water and settles in a new territory. Whatever blood types exist within that founding group become the genetic starting point for every generation that follows. Over hundreds of years, shaped by random chance and the constant pressure of local diseases, some blood types become more common while others fade into rarity. Multiply this process across thousands of years and countless separate migrations, and you eventually arrive at the blood type map of the world as we know it today. The high concentration of type A across Japan is not some cultural accident. It is a direct result of the genetic history of the people who first reached those islands and managed to survive there. But in this part of the world, blood type became something far more unusual than a medical fact. It turned into a widely accepted personality test that entire societies take seriously. In Japan, there is a cultural belief known as ketsueki gata, which roughly translates to blood type personality. The core idea is straightforward, and that simplicity is exactly why it has spread so widely. According to this belief, your blood type does not just describe your biology. It reveals your personality, your strengths, your weaknesses, and even the kind of romantic partner you should choose. Type A sits right at the heart of this entire system. People with type A blood are described as careful, organized, reserved, responsible, extremely detail-focused, loyal, and quietly nervous underneath a calm exterior. The kind of perfectionist who plans everything in advance and then lies awake at night replaying a small conversation from days earlier. In Japan and South Korea, this is not treated as a joke or a minor superstition. It shows up in magazines, in morning television programs, and even in dating profiles that list a person's blood type before mentioning their job. The belief is so deeply embedded in the culture that there is even a specific term, bura hara, meaning blood type harassment, used to describe the discrimination people can face simply because of which blood type they happen to be born with. There have been documented cases of preschools grouping young children by blood type, of companies factoring it into how they build work teams, and of an entire publishing industry built around self-help books, one for each blood type, that sold in massive numbers and topped bestseller lists for years. Popular cartoon and comic characters are often given a blood type as a quick storytelling shortcut, an easy signal to the audience about whether a character is meant to be the disciplined, organized leader or the impulsive free spirit. Products have been marketed by blood type as well, and for a long time an entire industry operated on the quiet assumption that the sugar coating on someone's blood cells could somehow shape their entire personality before they ever spoke a single word. Before going any further, the obvious question needs to be asked directly. Is any of this actually true? Does the A antigen genuinely have any influence on who a person becomes? And here is where the scientific evidence gives its clearest possible answer. When researchers have actually tested the blood type personality theory, running large surveys involving tens of thousands of participants and comparing their measured personality traits against their real blood types, the connection completely falls apart. There is no meaningful, repeatable relationship between blood type and personality. The careful, anxious type A, the bold and passionate type O, none of these patterns hold up once real data is examined. It gets worse for supporters of the theory once you look at where it actually came from. It did not originate in any laboratory. It traces back to a Japanese academic in the 1920s who published a small and deeply flawed study, and it was later picked up and heavily promoted in the 1970s by a television broadcaster who had no scientific or medical training whatsoever. It spread not because anyone ever proved it true, but because it was entertaining, flattering, and easy to bring up in casual conversation. So why does a thoroughly disproven idea manage to survive for so long? The real explanation is psychological rather than biological. When someone reads that type A people are organized and anxious, they naturally search their own memories for moments when that description fit them perfectly, while quietly ignoring every time it did not. Psychologists refer to this as the Barnum effect, the same mental trick that makes horoscopes feel oddly personal and accurate. The description is vague enough to apply to almost anyone, and the human mind fills in the gaps to make it feel true. Now add another layer on top of that. In a culture where children learn their blood type from a very young age, and where parents, teachers, and coworkers repeat these labels constantly throughout someone's life, the belief essentially becomes self-fulfilling. Tell a child for 18 years straight that they are the careful, responsible type, and it should not be surprising when they eventually grow into exactly that role. That outcome has nothing to do with genetics. It is simply the result of expectation repeated so often that it starts to feel like fact. There's also a more troubling side to this story worth sitting with for a moment, because once an entire society begins treating blood type as a form of destiny, it stops being harmless entertainment. People have reported being passed over for job opportunities, judged as unsuitable romantic partners, or permanently labeled a certain way, all because of a single trait they were born with and can never change. A characteristic that has genuinely no impact on personality gets turned into something restrictive and unfair. And that is the strange contradiction sitting at the center of this entire cultural phenomenon. The one thing your blood type truly cannot reveal is exactly what an entire culture insists that it does. While debunking these myths, there is one more worth mentioning because it targets type A blood specifically. You may have come across something called the blood type diet, the idea that people with type A blood should eat a mostly plant-based diet similar to early farmers, while other blood types should eat more like ancient hunters. This idea sold millions of copies of books worldwide. But when researchers actually tested it scientifically, they discovered something interesting. People following these diet plans did often become healthier, but the improvement had absolutely nothing to do with their blood type. A person with type O blood following the type A recommended diet saw the same health benefits as someone with type A blood. The diet worked simply because it happened to be a genuinely healthier way of eating, regardless of blood type. The blood type element was purely decorative, adding no real scientific value at all. This brings us to what your blood type can actually tell you, and honestly, it is more fascinating than any personality quiz or diet trend could ever be. Your blood type carries a faint but real signature of your ancient ancestry. Long before modern DNA testing existed, blood type was actually the very first genetic tool humanity ever used to trace how populations moved and spread across the world. Shortly after the First World War, two researchers named Hirschfeld tested blood samples from soldiers gathered from many different countries, and they discovered something remarkable. The frequency of types A, B, and O was not consistent from one nation to another. Instead, it shifted gradually across the map in patterns that lined up almost perfectly with geography. Type A tended to be more common across much of Western Europe. Type B increased steadily the further east you traveled, becoming especially common across Central Asia and the Indian subcontinent. Type O became overwhelmingly dominant among indigenous populations across the Americas, with some communities showing almost no other blood type at all. This discovery gave rise to an entire field once known as seroanthropology, the study of human history through blood patterns. Every one of these gradual shifts told a story of movement, of hunter-gatherer groups spreading into new lands, of farming communities expanding and mixing with others, of isolated populations drifting toward a particular blood type purely through chance over countless generations. Your type A blood is essentially one small data point on a migration map that took our species tens of thousands of years to complete. Today, direct DNA sequencing has largely taken over as the primary tool for tracing ancestry, since it can examine millions of genetic markers at once instead of relying on just one. But here's the truly remarkable part. These modern genetic studies did not contradict the older blood type patterns discovered a century ago. They confirmed them. The same ancient migrations that blood types only hinted at decades ago are the exact migrations that full genome studies are now mapping in incredible detail. The evidence from blood was accurate the entire time. It simply had no way to fully explain itself before modern DNA science caught up. Think again about those indigenous populations across the Americas with such a high concentration of type O blood, because that pattern is not a coincidence either. Tens of thousands of years ago, small groups of people crossed a frozen land bridge from Asia into a continent that had never been inhabited by humans before. They carried with them only the blood types present within their small founding group, and type O happened to be strongly represented among them. With very few new arrivals joining them for thousands of years afterward, that original genetic starting point simply reinforced itself generation after generation, until entire nations, spread across two continents, were overwhelmingly type O. Whenever you look at a global blood type map, you're not just looking at biology. You are looking at the preserved footprints of nearly every major journey your ancestors ever undertook. Then there is the plus sign, the Rh positive part of your blood type, which carries its own hidden mystery. The Rh system is actually one of the most complex systems in all of human biology, and its distribution across the globe is just as revealing as the A, B, O map. Rh negative blood, the rarer version, is unusually common among the Basque people of Spain and France, one of the oldest and most genetically distinct populations found anywhere in Europe. It becomes far rarer across East Asia, where the vast majority of people, much like most type A individuals in Japan and Korea, carry the Rh positive version, exactly as you do. The Rh factor also plays a critically important role in one very specific situation, pregnancy. When a mother who is Rh negative is carrying a baby who is Rh positive, her immune system can sometimes mistake the baby's blood for a foreign threat and begin attacking it. Before modern medicine understood this process, it led to serious, often fatal complications for newborns. Today, a simple and well-timed injection can prevent this condition almost entirely, making it one of the quieter medical achievements of the 20th century. As someone with A positive blood, you carry the D antigen, placing you on the more common side of this particular genetic divide, the side that avoids this specific complication in the vast majority of cases. Scientists still debate exactly why the rarer negative version of this trait managed to survive at all, given the reproductive risks historically associated with it. It remains one more unresolved mystery quietly present in your bloodstream. That same ancient genetic arrangement still controls something extremely practical every single day in hospitals around the world. Your type A blood is not universally compatible with everyone. You can safely receive red blood cells from other type A donors, as well as from type O donors, often referred to as the universal red cell donor. However, your body would strongly reject red blood cells from type B or type AB donors because your immune system recognizes those markers as foreign invaders and attacks them immediately. On the donation side, your type A blood can be given to other type A recipients and to type AB recipients, but never to someone who is type O or type B. The Rh factor adds another layer of complexity on top of that, forming a precise compatibility system, quietly enforced by that same genetic code, deciding exactly who is capable of helping whom in a medical emergency. If you think the type A system already sounds specific, consider one of the rarest exceptions within it. In a small number of people first identified in the city of Mumbai, a hidden genetic mutation completely switches off the basic structure that types A, B, and O are all built upon in the first place. On a standard blood test, these individuals often appear to have type O blood. In reality, they belong to an entirely different and extremely rare category, and they can only safely receive blood from other people who share this exact same rare condition. In some cases, a single person with this condition has had to search an entire country just to locate one compatible donor. It serves as a reminder that the simple 4-letter blood type system most people learn in school is really just the surface layer of something much deeper and more complicated underneath. There's also a quietly touching truth hidden in how you came to have type A blood in the first place. You inherited one version of the gene from your mother and one version from your father. The A version is dominant over the O version, which means it is entirely possible that you are secretly carrying a hidden O gene underneath your visible type A. A silent inheritance from one parent that never shows up on a standard test, but still exists within your genetic code, ready to be passed down to your own children someday. Two parents who both have type A blood can, to their genuine surprise, have a child with type O blood, if both parents happen to secretly carry that hidden O version all along. In a very real sense, your blood type represents a small genetic negotiation between two people, decided in the exact moment you were conceived, quietly continuing forward into generations of your family you have not even met yet. Step back and look at the full picture. And a single clear theme runs through everything discussed so far. Every genuine thing your blood type reveals points backward, into the long chain of people who came before you. And every false claim ever made about it, the personality traits, the special diet, the supposed destiny, points instead toward you as an individual, as though a single letter could somehow define an entire human life. That difference is the giveaway. The myths always flatter you. The real science, on the other hand, humbles you. Having type A blood does not make you special in the way the myths promised. It connects you to primates that existed long before humans ever walked the earth, to farmers, hunters, and displaced communities whose names have long since been forgotten, and to the survivors of terrible epidemics that most of us will only ever read about in history books. That is the honest trade that real science offers. It removes the flattering fantasy, and in return, it hands you something far more meaningful and real. So let us bring everything together, because after all of this, the true story behind type A positive blood is nothing like what the myths claimed, and somehow it is far more interesting than anything they were ever selling. Your blood type never decided your personality, and it cannot predict your future. It is not the careful, anxious character described in a magazine quiz somewhere in Tokyo. What it actually represents is something older and far deeper than any of that. It is a genetic heirloom, a variation so ancient that it existed before our species did, preserved across millions of years because it once helped your distant ancestors survive diseases capable of wiping out entire communities overnight. It carries a subtle, honest influence on certain aspects of your health, real but small, more of a quiet whisper than a definite verdict. And it stands as a genuine fingerprint of migration, one small clue within the enormous map, tracing exactly how humanity traveled across the world, eventually leading all the way to you. That simple letter, listed on your medical records, is not just a label. It is a message, written in sugar molecules and proteins, carried unbroken across countless generations of ancestors you will never meet, through continents, ice ages, and devastating pandemics, all the way down to this exact moment, right now.